Good evening and welcome to the St. Paul City Council Ward 3 Candidate Forum. My name is Debbie McNeil, and I am a League-trained moderator and a member of the League of Women Voters, Edina. This evening's forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters in St. Paul in partnership with the Highland Park Community Council, the McAllister-Groveland Community Council, the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, and Fair Vote Minnesota. The League believes that the success of St. Paul depends on the values, knowledge, and commitment of our elected officials. So it's essential for the public to better understand the views and opinions and commitments of the people running for elective office in St. Paul. It is this understanding that better equips voters with information to make informed voting decisions. We appreciate the candidates and the audience taking the time to be here tonight, especially on such a rainy and wet evening. The League of Women Voters does not support or oppose candidates or political parties, so the views expressed here tonight will be those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters. Before we begin, I'd like you to know that there are cards available for writing your questions to the candidates. I, as the moderator, will ask all the questions, and the questions will be sorted by members of the League of Women Voters St. Paul, who will attempt in good faith to ask me to ask questions that reflect the interests of the audience. Once you have a question written, please pass it to your right across your aisle so that it can be picked up by a League volunteer on the far right side of the room. I'd like to introduce you now to the candidates for Ward 3, St. Paul City Council Ward 3. Patty Hartman to my far right, and Chris Tolbert to my near right. The candidates have both agreed to the forum rules, which were included in their invitation to participate in this forum. And so here are some of the rules. Each candidate may give a 2-minute introductory statement and a 2-minute closing statement. And then the candidates will have 1 minute to answer questions asked by the audience, passed up to me by the audience, and 30 seconds for a rebuttal if necessary. And rebuttal will only be considered if a candidate has called out the other candidate by name in their answer to a question. The timer is sitting right in front of you here, candidates. Timer, would you raise your hand? And our timer tonight will hold up a sign to show you when you have 30 seconds remaining and when you must stop. And there's the red stop sign. I ask you candidates to please obey the stop sign. We will accept written questions throughout the forum, and questions must not be personal in nature. They must be on topics relevant for the position that the candidates are running for. All the questions must be addressed to both candidates, and they all will become the property of the League of Women Voters of St. Paul. There's no campaign literature or buttons or signs or other campaign-related items allowed in this forum room, but there is information about the candidates outside the forum. Please be quiet as possible. This forum is being videotaped, and that will allow everyone to hear. And I ask you to hold your applause or other verbal comment till the forum is ended. And most importantly, please turn off your cell phones and other devices or put them on silent right now. Members of the media may be recording this forum for their use, and the forum is being video recorded now by the St. Paul Neighborhood Network for viewing by the public. That's all the introductory remarks, so now we're going to begin with opening remarks, and the candidates' responses will be rotated throughout the forum. So for opening remarks, for 2 minutes each, I'm going to call first on Chris Tolbert.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the League of Women Voters, McAllister-Groveland District Council, Highland District Council. Thank you, Patty, for being here, and thank you all for coming on this cool and rainy night. It has been a great honor to represent the neighborhood that I grew up in, to represent the city that I'm a product in. I grew up on James Avenue. I played Highland Little League baseball. I skated at Groveland Rec Center. I went to Webster Elementary, Ramsey Junior High, and I'm a proud product of St. Paul Central. With the exception of 4 years up at St. John's, St. Paul has always been my home. And I don't say this because the fact that I was born here or grew up here or how long I lived here qualifies me for office. But I mention this because the opportunities that this city and this neighborhood gave me and the values that instill drive me every single day in the choices that I make. This community gave me a basis to succeed. It gave me that basis to succeed at St. John's, in law school, as an attorney at the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and the ability to earn your support and represent all of us on the St. Paul City Council. Past generations invested in me, they invested in our neighborhood, and they invested in our city with safe neighborhoods, first-class libraries for us to learn in, parks, housing, jobs, and quality schools. And for that, I am grateful. But I also know not everybody has had that opportunity, and that is something that we can change. Everyone deserves that opportunity. Over the last 7 years, we've accomplished a lot, but we have much more to do. We can continue the momentum that we've started for that vibrant and uplifting city for all people, for future generations. I believe St. Paul's future is bright, but I believe together we can make sure that it's even brighter. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, and I look forward to discussing with you, and I hope I can earn your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Patty Hartman, your opening remarks.
All right, and I'm assuming this is on. Yeah, I was asked tonight, did I want to be called Patty or Patricia? And I have to smile at that because that's a question I've had so much of my life. And I'm Patty for this race. There have been many moments when I'm Patricia in some of my other identities. But I've lived in this community for 37 years, and I did my undergraduate work at Hamline University, and I really enjoyed that school and had the opportunity to take classes at Macalester, another great school, and even at St. Kate's. And I'm an attorney. I got my law degree at William Mitchell, and I've been a business owner, owning my own law firm for the last 35 years. And I have very much enjoyed and appreciated the opportunities that I've had to represent people through the practice of law. I'm here tonight in large part because of some community involvement that I started a little more than a year ago, when it really started when I got a postcard in the mail telling me that I was going to have to choose a new trash container. And I have to say I was stunned that I knew nothing about this new plan until I got that first postcard. And that really led me to a journey where I decided to become part of an all-volunteer group of people from this community to seek out what was really behind this new trash plan. And I had the opportunity to go all around the city and talk to people who were very distressed by what was going on in the city. And I found out really in the course of that it really went much farther and deeper than just trash, that we have a lot of things going on in the city that are driving up our basic cost of living. And at the same time, the quality of our life seems to be declining. And it seems to be happening at an ever greater pace. And I thought about this, and I knew from working in the last year that these opportunities to have new people representing the citizens of this great city was going to happen this fall. And eventually...
I see the stop sign here, so I'll ask you to stop now.
Okay, thank you.
Because we're rotating answers, you will also get the chance to answer first for the next question.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to go to audience questions that are being screened by our league question screeners. And each of these questions, candidates, you'll have 1 minute to answer. So here's the first question, and we'll start with you, Patty Hartman, for the answer. Do you support a test of Mayor Carter's 2-lane proposal for Ide Mill Road before that plan is implemented? Why or why not?
Yes, I do, and I think that's a good question. My understanding is that the use of that road and how many vehicles are traveling on it hasn't really been measured for quite a few years. And I think that, like so many other things in our environment, is a natural resource. And I think before we make a commitment in a hard and fast manner, any direction, it would merit some study. And so I think that we should do that.
Thank you very much. Chris Tolbert.
Yes, and before I begin, I do want to say something publicly. For my entire life, I've called it Ide Mill Road. I was at Caronda last week, and I was corrected. It was Sister Ide, and named after the Ide family, and I've been saying it wrong for 36 years, and I apologize. So I might say it wrong, but I'm trying to correct myself. I think when Mayor Carter announced at his budget address that Ide Mill Road that he proposed putting it down to 2 lanes and adding a bike lane, it surprised all of us. And the one thing that we've been doing, or I've been doing at the council, is trying to collect the facts of what planning are we doing, what other things are we doing to make sure that the steps forward that we've had on the neighborhood streets, on Lexington Avenue, on those streets that used to be the thoroughfare between 35 and 94, what steps are we taking to ensure that if that plan does go forward, are we going to mitigate that so we don't go backwards and have those cars racing through our neighborhoods? We've taken sorry.
Thank you. Well, Chris Tolbert, you'll be first for this next question. What would be your plan to expand sidewalks into areas of Highland that don't have them? Would residents get to weigh in?
Yes, I think every decision that we make at the council, people should weigh in and we should have public process. Sidewalks are one of the things that we need in a city. Sidewalks make it safer for people to walk, for people to get to school, for people to move around, and we have sidewalk gaps all over the city. At Expo Elementary School, they used to not have sidewalks around there on every street. A young girl was hit because she was walking in the street. She's okay. She was okay. And as a result of that, we applied for the first Safe Routes to School grant, and we got it, and we implemented those sidewalks in the neighborhood so that kids can walk to school safely. Sidewalks are a great amenity in any urban area, particularly like St. Paul, for kids, for adults, for elderly, for anybody, and we should have sidewalks on every street possible.
Patty Hartman.
Yes, I do think that the residents should be able to weigh in on whether or not sidewalks get laid in the neighborhoods. I think that the issues are different if it's going to be a public building like a school versus residential. And I think a lot of deference should be given to the owners of the parcels of residences. If those owners don't feel that they need sidewalks, I don't see the reason for us to rip up the grass and pour a lot of concrete there. And I think that the public processes that we use should genuinely give an opportunity for the people to express themselves. And I think there should be some accountability and some openness about what those responses are that are drawn from the people, and so that the city isn't keeping those responses from the rest of the community. But I definitely think the people should have a say in that, especially when it's their own residential area.
The next question is about trash, and we'll start with Patty Hartman. Here's the question. If the trash referendum results in a no vote and the current ordinance authorizing it is repealed, what should the city do next? Patty Hartman, would you start?
Well, if there is a no vote and the ordinance is repealed, one thing I think the city should do is clear up the misinformation that it's been pumping out there, claiming that there's going to have to be a $27 million tax hike for money that we don't really need to pay to the haulers. And that really saddens me that we would put all of that misinformation out there in what appears to be an effort to intimidate voters into voting yes. But I think that the city then should really engage the citizens and find out what support there is for an organized trash plan. It's my understanding that there is support in this community, but without a doubt, the overwhelming majority of the people that I spoke with were very opposed to the plan that went through. The fact that it didn't allow for sharing, the fact that it didn't allow for opting out, the fact that we are all being charged 2.5 to 3 times the rates for organized collection in a community as close to us as Maplewood, and that this is a burden to our vulnerable residents.
Thank you. Chris Tolbert, would you like to hear the question again, or?
I believe I remembered it, but
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the question was, if the trash referendum results in a no vote and the current ordinance authorizing it is repealed, what should the city do next?
Well, I think a lot of that, and the place that we're in right now, there's a lot of what ifs. What will the result of the referendum be? And more importantly, what is the decision that the Supreme Court is going to make regarding whether or not the city can get out of the contract, one, or two, if the city can get out of the contract based on the referendum, can we get out of the contract without damages? Those are two what ifs, and until we have a Supreme Court decision on that, until the end of the referendum, there are not a lot of things. There's a lot of things in the air at this moment.
May I have a rebuttal?
If you weren't mentioned by name, then we're not going to have rebuttals.
Okay.
But you have 2 minutes of closing, both of you, to touch on any issues that you feel you didn't get to discuss adequately. So here's the next question, which is, we'll start with Chris Tolbert because we are rotating. And the question is, how can we have a voice in the conversation about the Ford plant? Chris Tolbert?
Yeah, I think every single day the residents have a voice in the Ford plant. We did a decade long of community process with a community-based task force. We have had over 50 public meetings. I myself did 20 to 30 living room meetings around the Ford site with many people in this room who hosted me gratefully in their home, and I was grateful for that. We have been out having conversations. We've had a lot of engagement, and that conversation and that engagement continues and will always continue if I'm your council member. And that is how we move forward, that robust conversation, and I look forward to working with you over the coming years.
Patty Hartman.
Well, I've had the opportunity to personally attend a few of these Ford site meetings that have been held recently, and I would say they really sadden me. They also anger me. They just really do not provide any meaningful citizen engagement. People are asked to wander around a room and look at blow-ups on easels, and they're told that there are experts in the room. People are told to put their questions in a box and that they'll be gathered. And I guess you're supposed to trust that somebody's really going to look at it. But from what I can tell, a lot of the public citizen comment that actually does, through great effort, get placed into the public record is just plainly and blatantly ignored by the city. And this is one of the reasons why I think we need a change. I don't think we have a real democracy here in our government, and I think the citizens are being abused. I think it's just a farcical display where the decisions have been made and there's no citizen engagement.
Here's the next question, next audience question. What is your plan for the potholes? In 1 minute. We'll start with Patty Hartman.
Well, I guess the laughter makes it obvious. We really need to fix those potholes, and really, it's good we can laugh about it, but I think we all know it is no laughing matter. Really, our streets are in such a state of disrepair. I hear from people that they're embarrassed when they have out-of-town people or friends from other geographic areas come here. People are stunned. They're disbelieving the state of the streets, and especially some of them like Summit, and the damage that's being done to the cars. I also can't help but think these are real safety issues, too. If you want to immobilize a city and really weaken it, just impede the navigation of its streets. And that's what's going on. It's hard to get around this town without doing damage to your car. And it's a physical hazard, too. People trip. I can't believe that it's been such a low priority that we haven't done more, but it needs immediate attention, and it has to be raised to the top of the list.
Chris Tolbert.
Yes, and I agree with that. Our roads need to be fixed. We need to invest in our infrastructure. It's been decades in the making of kicking the can down the road. A few things that I've worked on at the council. One, I helped lead the charge to change the RSVP program to the SRSVP program. Previously, arterial roads were not part of our reconstruction planning. When I found that out early in my career, we changed that program. I also led the charge to get that influx of investment when the terrible 20 roads were redone back in 2013, I believe. And on top of that, I worked when I was on the League of Minnesota Cities to bring this issue to the state, because cities across the state are facing this crumbling infrastructure. And we organized a coalition of mayors from across the state to make the League of Minnesota Cities #1 priority getting a dedicated resource for investing in roads. That hasn't happened yet, and we're going to,
Thank you for obeying the stop sign. The next question is, we'll start with Chris Tolbert, and here's the question. What are some of your ideas regarding improvement of bicycle infrastructure? Improvement of bicycle infrastructure.
Yeah, well, bicycle infrastructure adds greatly to the vibrancy of our community. And it's something that we need to continue moving down the bike path on, or the bike plan on. Freudian slip. We need to continue moving with the bike plan forward because it adds vibrancy. Obviously, this is a hard thing because, you know, in a perfect world, we'd have enough road width for a street with cars, a street with parking, sidewalks, but dedicated bike lanes, all these things. But our city was planned out before we as citizens wanted those things. So we have to make tough decisions, and we have to work with the surrounding community and the surrounding business owners and make sure that we can, in the best way possible, bring all those wants and needs together. But I think bike lanes are a great investment in our city, and they add to the vibrancy of a city like St. Paul.
Patty Hartman.
I think as we move forward, I think we have been doing great things for the bicycle community here, and I'm glad that we're supporting that. I want to support all forms of transportation, all modalities. I think we have to be realistic and look at our byways as a resource that has to be shared and it has to be allocated in a reasonable way. I think we have to make sure that we still have good, reasonable areas for the cars and be pragmatic about how many people are actually using the bicycle paths and how much equity there is in devoting the resources to more and more bicycle paths. But I do support that, and I want to make sure that they're safe, and I think we have to have things that are protection for the bicyclists. Also, I think we can perhaps design more thoughtful routes here so that people can get around the city and make connections between the various bike paths. And maybe we need a little more education for people who are using bicycles in terms of the rules that apply when they're on roads as opposed to the sidewalks.
Audience, I ask you to hold your applause till the end of the forum. We'll get to hear more questions if we don't interrupt the candidates, more answers to questions. The next question is about ranked choice voting, and we'll ask Patty Hartman to start. Do you support having another ballot question to remove ranked choice voting?
I will tell you, I haven't really given that a lot of thought. I know there's some controversy about ranked choice voting. And if there is support to remove it, then I would say by all means it should be a ballot question, because something like that affects the generality of how we govern ourselves is something that should be put to a vote where all of the people weigh in on it. Myself, I can't say that I really have strong feelings. I understand some of the rationale for why we do ranked choice, and I just don't have a strong personal feeling. But I think if we're going to make a choice or a change, it should be a ballot question. I would agree with that.
Chris Tolbert.
Yeah, I think if that change came forward, it would definitely need to be a ballot question because it went forward with a ballot question. I have not heard that in my conversations at the doors or from constituents over the time of revisiting that. I mean, the conversations happened, but I have not heard that conversation recently. So,
Thank you. The next question, which we'll start with Chris Tolbert, is about trash. Do you personally believe that trash collection should be a city service? Do you personally believe that trash collection should be a city service? Can we start with you, Chris Tolbert?
yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Yes, I believe in organized trash collection. I think it makes more sense. It's better for the environment. I think it is part of our sustainability plan. And I think it's something that we should continue to work on. I think it's something that we should continue to move forward on. And there's obviously some lessons that need to be learned in the current trash contract, but I think we should take those lessons and move forward and improve the program. I do not think we should go back to what we had before.
Patty Hartman.
I think if the majority of our residents believe it should be handled by the city, then the city should do it. I do not believe that the majority of our residents approve of the plan that we currently have in place, It does not support the environment. It is regressive. It really promotes higher waste generation and reduces the incentive for people to recycle or even compost. It's also exceedingly expensive. We have the highest, most expensive trash plan anywhere in the metro area. It reduced so many options that would have been so simple to keep that it was mind-boggling that we didn't get to keep them. I don't know of another community that doesn't at least let people opt out. And if the citizens don't think, as a majority, that the city should be involved, I think the citizens will do quite well to manage their own use of that service. Most people that I saw weigh in on it said nothing was broken and didn't need to be fixed.
Here's a general question for you both, and we'll start with Patty Hartman. What accomplishment are you most proud of? Can we start with you, Patty Hartman?
Wow. You know, I think probably like most people, there have been times in my life where you had to get your world rocked, and it's just the fact that you can get up and go and do something again. And there have been a couple of cases that I worked on that I think I did. I got feedback that I did a lot for the clients. I am by nature, quite frankly, a detective. And so I like to do investigation. And I had the privilege of working on some cases in my early career where I was able to find some evidence that a lot of lawyers around the country thought might be there, but I was able to get a judge in Hennepin County to produce it. And it really made a big difference in the litigation of the Delcon Shield cases. And then I was actually asked to be a witness in some grand jury proceedings that were brought a few years later.
Chris Tolbert, what accomplishment are you most proud of?
Yeah, the first professional job that I got an interview because my grandpa knew somebody who worked there. When I had the interview, he said, wait, and I got the job, he said, I opened the door for you, now it's your job to perform. But he also added, just remember, not everybody has someone to open a door for them. As a result of that, we started a program called Right Track, YJ2 in 2013, where we decided we as a city were going to open the door for hundreds and hundreds of kids across the city of St. Paul. YJ2 offers low-income youth their first professional internship. The first year we did it, there was 23 jobs at US Bank, at Ecolab, at the City of St. Paul, at the Science Museum, all across our city. This past year, over 250 students had their first professional internships. Creating that program and continuing to implement that program and grow that program and watch these hundreds and hundreds of kids get that first professional internship, I'm very proud of that.
Candidates, here's another question about the Ford site. I think we had one about the Ford site. Anyway, if we didn't, here is one. Do you think the final revision of the environmental study of the Ford site should include a review of greenhouse gas emissions? We'll start with you, Chris Tolbert, and I'll read the question again. Do you think the final revision of the environmental study of the Ford site should include a review of greenhouse gas emissions?
Sorry, that's a very technical question. I'm going through my brain to remember what all is exactly in the environmental review, and I'm trying to remember if that's in there. And I apologize, I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, would you like to comment on whether the environmental study ought to include a review of greenhouse gas emissions, whether or not it does right now, if that's a good idea?
I think it makes sense to collect as much possible data as we possibly can. The environmental review process is a very strict state legislated review process, and it's about following exactly that process. There is not a lot of leeway to go in and out of what that includes. I would have to learn more about exactly if that's included in it or not. As everyone knows, maybe not everyone knows, currently we are under the environmental review process called an AUAR of the Ford site. That is under review, and those results should be coming back in the next couple of months. So.
Patty Hartman?
Yes, I think it definitely should have such a review. I think the environment is exceedingly important, and I know there are a lot of concerns about the Ford site and how it's going to impact the environment. One of them is going to be the transportation issues, what's going to happen with the cars, the density, bringing more cars in, and emissions from those, but also the process of building out that Ford site. I think there's a lot of legitimate concern that while it's under construction, you're going to see a lot more traffic and a lot more emissions. And I think that the people who live here have a right to expect that there's going to be a great deal of care taken to protect this environment and protect the livability and the health of everybody, not only while it's under construction, but certainly for the long term once it's been built. So I hope they do undertake that kind of a study.
The next question is about housing, and Patty Hartman, will start with you. How would you address the affordable housing shortage in St. Paul? How would you address the affordable housing shortage in St. Paul?
Well, I know there's a lot of interest in building a lot of new housing, and I'm not opposed to that. But it's my understanding that some of the most affordable housing that we'll come up with, and the most quickly, is that which we consider naturally occurring affordable housing. We do have a lot of structures throughout the city. Some of them are former houses, some of them are former commercial buildings that can be rehabbed, and some of these are really beautiful structures. I know we have a lot of older buildings in this city that have a lot of character, that were built at a time and built with materials that you really can't even duplicate anymore. And there's really something to be said for preserving the character of those older dwellings. But we also, I can tell you as someone who's officed in downtown St. Paul for a couple of decades, we have an abundance of commercial buildings that are now, some of them in the process of being rehabbed and converted to residential. And it's my understanding that that kind of housing is more affordable than new.
Chris Tolbert, how would you address the affordable housing shortage in St. Paul?
Yeah, in 2018, I became chair of the Housing Redevelopment Authority. And when I became chair, we made affordable housing our number one priority at the Housing Redevelopment Authority. That year, we passed a historic measure, an investment in affordable housing, over $71 million over the next 3 years. We created the first of its kind in St. Paul, Affordable Housing Trust Fund, something that has a source that is not property taxes. We started using for the first time a 4D program, which helps protect naturally occurring affordable housing. We started using that deliberately, but we still have a lot to do. This is something that I hear from people all over our neighborhood, people of all ages who are concerned about if when they get on a fixed income, are they going to be able to afford housing? I hear it from young people and from everybody. We have a lot to do, and I think there's a lot of opportunities. For example, at the Ford site, we have made 20% affordable housing on the Ford site a top goal, and I believe in partnership with Ryan, we will be able to achieve that 20% affordable housing goal at the Ford site, and that's just one example.
Here's the next question. This is about taxes, and we'll start with you, Chris Tolbert. Do you think the rate of tax increase in the city of St. Paul is sustainable? Do you think the rate of tax increase in the city of St. Paul is sustainable?
Yeah, the taxes, the property taxes that we continue to face is not sustainable long-term. This is something that I continue to see, and I pay the taxes just like everybody else in this room, and I see my property tax bill. At the same time, I hear from people about all the services that they want provided, whether that's for police, for parks, for library hours, for fire, for public works, for new roads. And so it's really trying to figure out how to balance that and how to make those services go forward while also reining in the property taxes that we face. We're limited in the city of St. Paul with our ability to gain revenue to pay for those services. So we need to do things like be creative by working with the state to get dedicated funding sources for roads, for affordable housing and things like that. We also need to be creative like we were around the Expo sidewalks that I mentioned earlier. Those sidewalks, because we applied for a Safe Routes to School grant with the Met Council, we got those sidewalks paid for without assessments and very little city dollars. Those are the types of creative things that we need to continue to do.
Patty Hartman, do you think the rate of tax increase in the city of St. Paul is sustainable?
No, I do not, and I'm saying that basically as a personal anecdotal observation, but I also hear it from people who have a lot of background in finance, and the rate at which these taxes are climbing at some point is going to eclipse the value of what we have, and it isn't sustainable, and it is a very serious burden, a burden on everybody, and I guess it's one of the reasons why I am interested in seeing a change in our governance here. I'm very skeptical of what's happening with the money resources that we do have in St. Paul. We pay so much money and so much more every year, and yet the services are declining, very basic services. And so I think there has to be more accounting. The kinds of numbers that get released by our city are really very general, and I know there's going to be more line item information behind that. And I think we need to have a more full disclosure, and we need to take a hard look and see what is really going on.
The next question is about the environment, and we'll start with you, Patty Hartman. What role can the city of St. Paul play in controlling climate change? What is the city's role in controlling climate change?
Well, I think that the city could do more with regard to the issues of the recycling and the trash, because I think those things feed into our resources and overall have an impact on our environment. I think in terms of the larger issues about temperature changes, I'm not sure. These are very gradual processes, and I think there are a lot of scientists that are having difficulty agreeing on what we can do or when we're going to see any kind of measurable impact so that we'll know if what we're doing even makes any sense. But I think in the here and the now, we can do some short-term things, and I think that would be, I think in the area of recycling and trash, I think that we've been encouraging various modalities of transportation. We have built up our metro transit, our trains, our buses, our walkability, our bicycling. I think they've been doing a lot of things that cut down on the need for cars and the miles.
Chris Tolbert, what role do you think the city can play in controlling climate change?
Yeah, the climate change is real, and the city must address that. I was proud to co-author the city's 2030 Climate Action Plan, and I don't think it's just one thing. It's an all-hands-on-deck, across-the-board thing that we must do. It is coming. Climate change is coming, and we must address it. Whether that is through the sustainable building policy, whether that is by adding transit options, whether that is getting multiple vehicles off the roads, whether that is further investing and further incentivizing people to recycle and to do different things with their waste or composting. We need to make climate change an important part of what we're doing at the City of St. Paul. And I will continue to do that as your council person.
The next question is about modalities other than cars. And we'll start with Chris Tolbert. What are your plans for supporting safer streets for bikes, scooters, and pedestrians? Safer streets for bikes, scooters, and pedestrians. Can we start with you, Chris Tolbert?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think safer streets is essential to our neighborhood. A walkable, livable neighborhood is key. That's why we've made important pedestrian improvements along Snelling Avenue with the medians. That's why we are making changes down at the Lexington, Montreal, West 7th, I don't even know what you call it, it's such a problem right now, to make it safe for people to come together. That's why it's important that we add sidewalks where there are sidewalk gaps. We need to invest in those things because they help our community thrive. They make it safer for people to walk. They make it safer for people to bike. And quite frankly, that's what matters. The first job is having a safe community for people to move around in.
Patty Hartman, plans for supporting safer streets for bikes, scooters, and pedestrians.
Well, I think as we're streaming all these different types of transportation into the same limited spaces, we are creating risks of a lot of injuries. And I also think that a lot of people that are using scooters and bicycles could use perhaps some education on the best and safest way of using these. I think a lot of motorists are having problems figuring out where the bicycles are coming from, whether they're on sidewalks or on streets. And sometimes the visibility around here just isn't enough so that you can see near collisions in terms of people not stopping at stop signs. And by that, I'm talking about sometimes it's the bicyclists. I think we do need some more education here as we're having all of these different forms intersect with each other. I don't think it's so much an issue of pedestrians, but I know sometimes pedestrians also feel threatened on the sidewalks because of the use of the scooters. And I've been told that sometimes we have very young people who shouldn't actually be using the scooters, using them.
Here's the next question, and Patty Hartman, I will start with you. What ideas or plans do you have for the community to install public art and/or create venues for music and entertainment? Installing public art or having venues for music and entertainment. Do you have ideas on that subject? Would you start, please?
You know that nobody's ever asked me that question before, but I love art and I love music. And if we're building this new Ford site community, I think it would be a great opportunity for us to have some community structures. Some people have mentioned the idea of theaters, but public art that encourages and shows off the talent of people with the visual arts, I think is a great thing. I'm not sure, you know, there are a lot of coffee houses and businesses around here that are willing to offer up their spaces to encourage the local artists, and I always think that's a good thing. Sometimes you can see some very nice pieces. But maybe this is something we can do as we start to develop the newer spaces here with more community buildings, because I think we do have a community here in St. Paul that appreciates the arts, and that might be something that we could do, maybe generate more interest with our community classes even.
Chris Tolbert, do you have ideas or plans to install public art or create venues for music and entertainment?
Yeah. Well, I think art is a vital part to a rich community. And we are fortunate in St. Paul to have so much diversity in that art. And it's so many different forms, whether it's music, painting, sculptures, or public art. All of that makes our community richer. And, you know, I was proud to help support investments in the M in Lowertown. That M is is going to be a crown jewel as it continues to move forward. I think the Palace Theater, which I supported, is something that has added a lot to the vibrancy of downtown St. Paul. I support our Public Works art requirement, where a certain percentage of all public projects need to have an art component. I think that just adds a richness to our community. And I love the public art that we've added around many of our projects, and I will continue to support that.
Here's the next question, and we'll start with you, Chris Tolbert. Would you please address the recent city council vote to increase taxes by 20% if the garbage referendum passes? City council vote to increase taxes 20% if the garbage referendum passes. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, and this is kind of a continuation on the conversation that we were having earlier, where there's a lot of what ifs. We don't know what the results of the referendum are going to be. We don't know what the Supreme Court is going to say regarding the contract. One, can the city get out of the contract? Two, if the city can get out of the contract, if there's a no vote, can the city get out of the contract, and can the city get out of the contract with no damages? As a result of that, and a lot of what ifs, when we set the max levy, not the final levy, we had to have a contingency plan because we don't know what the results of the referendum are going to be, and we have not seen a Supreme Court decision yet. I think the mayor's original proposal of 4.85 was about as far as I thought we could go in property taxes this year. Obviously, we did not want to add that 22% to the final property tax bill. But at the same time, in order to protect the city of St. Paul, to protect our AAA bond rating and all the what ifs, we have to have a contingency out there because we don't know what the result of the referendum is going to be, and we don't know what the result of the Supreme Court decision is going to be yet.
Patty Hartman.
Well, we do know the result of the referendum. The Supreme Court has spoken. It said we had the right to be on the ballot. And that's the only decision the Supreme Court's going to make. And all of this talk about what ifs is just a distraction and a red herring. Any opinion that the Supreme Court writes is only going to have to justify why we have a right to the ballot vote. Don't hold your breath waiting for them to discuss anything about the force majeure clause. That wasn't the issue on appeal. And really, the city talks out of both sides of its mouth. All of its arguments in the referendum were directed to the judge saying, we can't lose this ordinance because then we won't have a trash plan. We won't be able to enforce the contract. That was the whole argument they made on appeal, that if they lost on appeal, there would be no contract to be enforced. They called it an unconstitutional impairment of the contract. They know fully that there's no obligation and, in fact, no legal right to enforce that contract. The 20% taxes is phony.
Audience, the candidates are following the rules, and I'd ask that you do the same, please. The next question is, we'll start with Patty Hartman. How will you support the needs of the elderly and handicapped? Would you like to start?
I would enjoy very much the opportunity to do community outreach to the elderly. I really believe in the ability of the elderly and the handicapped to have a right to stay in their own homes, to age in place. All of the studies show that people do so much better in their advanced years the longer they can stay in their own place, and I've seen it in my own personal experiences with people. So what I would like to do is keep the taxes low. I would like to encourage community involvement, maybe with churches or other organizations where you can help find people that'll do the services for the elderly, mow the lawn, shovel the walks, do those kinds of things for somebody who's disabled or elderly, help pick up the slack so that they can stay in their own home as long as possible. I think that's what a lot of people want. Of course, I'm not opposed to any kind of assisted living or community dwellings either, but it's been my experience many people would like that option of staying in their own house as long as possible.
Chris Tolbert, how would you support the needs of the elderly and handicapped?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different aspects that we need to address when we're talking about that. One, I think you're exactly right, Patty. Many of the people I talk to who are older, they want to stay in their homes, and we have to help them stay in their home and age in place. We also, I hear from a lot of elderly folks that they are worried about being able to afford housing as they age on a fixed income. That's why building affordable housing is key, and investing in naturally occurring affordable housing is key. And I think we also need to make it a place where elderly can get around. And that goes back to why we have sidewalks. That goes back to why we had ADA compliance. That goes back why all people can move around regardless of if they can walk, if they have a walking impediment, or if they need a walker or a wheelchair. And I think we need to make this a place where anybody can live regardless of your age.
Here's the next question, which we'll ask you, Chris Tolbert, to start with. Do you think there is a deer problem in Highland? Deer as in D-E-E-R. Do you think there's a deer problem in Highland?
I think if you live next to Edgecombe, you think there's a deer problem in Highland, because I hear a lot about it. And I think the deer hunt is actually coming up. I've seen the notice and the signs. The deer hunt is coming up, and that's always something that when I first learned about it, it was fascinating that bow hunters volunteer to go hunt because you can only have so many deer per acre in the woods. I will leave the number of deer, and they have them pretty well marked to the experts on the numbers that we can have down in Crosby and other places. It is always, I can never say it's not boring when you're driving down Edgecombe and you see 5 deers running down the street in front of you. But I think that's why we have the deer hunts, and we take it seriously and do it in a humane way and donate the deer to charity.
Patty Hartman, do you think there's a deer problem in Highland?
I have to say I've never encountered a deer in Highland, but I guess if other people have, I'll believe in those accounts. And in terms of what to do, well, I know we've got animal control in St. Paul, and I assume that other people have worked with other organizations to to be cautious about this. I know that it's always an issue with safety. If a deer bolts in front of a car, you can actually have some pretty serious injuries from something like that. But I wasn't aware of that. I think it's, in some ways, it's kind of quaint to know that in this city we can have that kind of wildlife, but it's not anything that I've encountered personally. I just would support that we do have an intelligent and careful way of approaching the deer here and make sure that people are safe.
Here's the next question. Patty Hartman, would you start, please? How would you encourage businesses to stay in St. Paul?
Well, I think we could do more to be supportive of our businesses. I think there's been a lot of regulation that puts burdens on businesses, drives up the costs unnecessarily, and makes it harder for the small businesses to stay here. I think also that we're doing things by letting in the larger big box types of national chains that I don't think are necessarily reflective of the values that we have in St. Paul, and I think that they're selling short the great venues that our local businesses provide us. We have some great locally owned coffee shops, and I hate hearing about the fact that maybe there's going to be a Starbucks go in that'll have a drive-through window. It raises the specter of so many issues with the traffic and also the competition of a national chain that is going to compete for our consumer dollars for the coffee shops. So I think we should be more careful about what we're doing with the businesses.
Chris Tolbert, how would you encourage businesses to stay in St. Paul?
Yeah, I think one of the important things is to listen to businesses and talk to the business owners of all sizes. A couple years ago, David Burley from the Blue Plate, Highland Grill, Groveland Tap, approached me and he said, Chris, a lot of us restaurants are having problems. Your liquor laws are outdated. They were written for a different time. He said, when these laws were written, beers were cheap and the food was expensive. Now, the beers are more expensive than the food. And the way that we had it set up is if you were a restaurant and you sold 40%, or if you sold more than half your sales as liquor, you no longer could be a restaurant. And it wasn't because people were drinking more or they were serving more. It was because the beers started being $10, $12, $15. And so we addressed that. We looked into it. We changed the liquor laws. We rewrote how they were and did a balancing act to ensure that these restaurants were still restaurants and they were operating the same as restaurants, but they could thrive and not worry about selling these craft expensive beers that they needed in order to meet that balance. And so it's updating our laws and listening to the businesses in that cases.
The next question is, and we'll start with Chris Tolbert, if you're elected, how will you be accessible to your constituents? Can we start with you, Chris Tolbert?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think, one of the things that I have always done as a council member and before I was a council member is met with constituents, came to where they are, whether that means being in your living room. Many people here, as I said before, I've had living room meetings. I've had backyard meetings. I've gone out and reached out to where people are. For example, last year, I went and visited all the PTAs in the district because those parents are busy. They don't have time to call me. They don't have time to email me. But I wanted to hear how we can work better as a city with them. So I went to every PTA meeting to meet with those parents. I will meet with any constituent that wants to meet with me. And that's how I continue to be as a council member.
Patty Hartman, if elected, how will you be accessible to your constituents?
I would try to make myself available as much as the constituents could require. And I know that not everybody is going to communicate in the same format. I find this out with clients. Some people will talk on the telephone and don't really want to get together in person. They don't need to. Some people will communicate by email. Some people text. Some people just have to have that in-person, face-to-face meeting. And I would try to accommodate the needs and the desires of the constituents. I think community meetings are very valuable. It's an efficient way, and you probably get a lot of ideas circulating when you can meet with a group of people. And I would be very happy and willing to do that, to go to where the community meetings are. I, right now, live in St. Paul, and I work in St. Paul, and I would try to make myself available as much as I could. I would certainly expect to be devoting at least the 1,000 hours per year to this job if I were elected. I suspect it really requires much more than that, and I will do it.
The next question is again about the Ford plant, and Patty Hartman, let's start with you. Could you tell us your thoughts on Area C of the Ford plant?
Well, Area C, as I understand it, is an old contamination site, and I think it is validly the subject of a great deal of concern by the people. It's something that has been, I think, as much as possible walled off, but there is a great deal of concern that once you start construction on this piece of land, that you could disturb something. And of course, we're looking at a contamination site that's in close proximity to the Mississippi River. And so while we have the potential for great beauty and great natural resources in this area that's going to be developed, we also have something that some people regard as a ticking time bomb. And so I think before the first scoop of dirt is lifted from that land, somebody needs to address what's really there and what is going to be the best way of remediating it. My understanding is right now, nobody's talking about it. They're saying we're going to develop the Ford site, but that we're not developing Area C, so why are we talking about it? But that's really foolish. Area C is in that land.
Chris Tolbert, could you tell us your thoughts on Area C?
Yeah, for those of us who've been camping, there's often a rule that says leave your campsite better and cleaner than you found it. Since I got elected in 2011, I often have said, we need to ensure that Ford takes their pollution with them. I am proud that we have put that pressure on Ford and continued to monitor them. Ford is in the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency VIC program for both Area C and Above the Bluff. I am proud that Above the Bluff, we not only got Ford to clean it up to industrial standards, which they're legally required, but they cleaned it up to residential standards, all of which was done with not a dime of public dollars. Below is Area C, which, as Patty mentioned, Ford does not plan on selling. That is currently in the VIC program with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Ford is working with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to monitor that, to test it, and we as a city must continue to watch it. We must continue to ensure that no pollution is leaching off there, and we will continue to hold Ford accountable if any pollution does occur, and Ford will always be accountable for that.
The next question is about jobs. Chris Tolbert, can we start with you, please? How would you address the job gap among teens of color in the city and help them get access to higher paying jobs?
Yeah, that is something that the Right Track program, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, that is something that has been very successful on helping low-income or at-risk teens get jobs, get their first professional internship, and start moving up the ladder to successful living wage jobs. There's other things that we're doing as a city. I serve both on the Ramsey County Workforce Investment Board, and I helped organize the Greater Metropolitan Workforce Investment Board. We are creating pathways. There are jobs, there are employers who need workers, qualified workers, and we need to help all citizens get the accreditation, the college degree, the certificate, the license. 80% of jobs of today need some sort of accreditation, 2-year degree or whatever. And we are setting up a pathways program, and we are going to expand this not only in St. Paul, into Ramsey County, across the region, and to the state, so that we can be ready to meet those jobs and people can have living wage jobs that are family sustainable living wage jobs.
Patty Hartman, how would you address the job gap among teens of color in the city?
Well, I have to say I've personally taken classes at St. Paul College to go back and learn a few skills in the digital field, and I'm really impressed with all the courses that they have there and their ability to communicate and engage with people of all backgrounds. And I would try to encourage our teens and our people who are in high school to have some connections and get into some of these programs and take these classes. There are already a lot of programs that invite high schoolers into these community colleges or their local schools, and we have a crying need for people who have trade backgrounds, crafts, skills, automotive. There's a real demand for people that have these kinds of skills, and we have a gem of a school in our own backyard. So I would encourage more connections there, because I think that we've got the resources. It's more a question of connecting it up And I think schools can do some very creative things with the internships that will be a path to a job.
Thank you. Here's the next question, with Patty Hartman. How will you make decisions that affect your district and affect the city residents overall? Where will you get the information that informs your decisions?
That's such an easy question. I would ask the people. I find so many people who are embedded in this community, and they have so many good ideas. We have people that have extremely good resumes of experience in various areas and fields, and I can't tell you how many people I've met in the last year that I am impressed with the caliber of their thought and their knowledge. And I would just try to do some community outreach and make sure that we have some real discussions and capture the great talent that's already in the community, bring it forward, and keep the discussion going. The people that live here are going to be the most motivated to get the best result. And I think we just need to give them a chance. We just need to listen.
Chris Tolbert, how would you make decisions that affect the district and the city overall, and where would you get information for decision making?
Yeah. One of the best parts of representing Ward 3 in St. Paul is, I think that turned off my mic. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. One of the best parts of representing Ward 3 is having such an engaged citizenship. We are fortunate. I think anybody would be so lucky to have not only this many people turn out for this debate, but this is how many people turn out for a street reconstruction project. This is how many people turn out when there's a rash of garage break-ins in a neighborhood. This is how many people turn out on any conversation. And as your council member, what I think is most important is you have to read all the information. There's always a lot of reading. But you also need to listen to everybody that you can. Listen, digest. And the thing is not everyone agrees, as you know, everyone here knows. But you need to listen, think, and find out exactly how it's going to how you can move forward to best help the community.
Here's the next question, and we'll start with you, Chris Tolbert. Do you support hiring more police? Why or why not?
Yeah, we have a population in St. Paul that continues to grow. Our 911 calls continue to move up. I think police officers are important for the public safety of our community. I think having enough police officers for our community is important. And particularly, the thing that we found is we want police officers who can spend time investigating, spend time on scenes, and have short response times. In order to do that, we will need to have more police officers.
Patty Hartman, do you support hiring more police? Tell us why or why not.
I do, because I think that the police are an important element to help keep our environment safe. I know that we do have an ever-increasing number of 911 calls and that the response times have been increasing. And in recent times, we know we've had shootings every day in St. Paul, and this is just a really horrible and awful statement about the safety issues that we're confronting. So we have to fund more police, and having a greater police presence, I think, will keep the city safer. It'll reduce the response times. And besides the physical violence, we also have an increase in the burglaries and the property crimes. And all of this goes hand in hand. We want to keep this a livable city that people can feel safe in. Even having your house broken into is a tremendous sense of violation, and people will feel less safe. So yes, I think we should commit more resources.
This next question is about Highland Golf Course, and Patty will ask you to start. If elected, how would you work with Parks and Rec and Ramsey County and other stakeholders to address proposed changes at Highland Golf Course?
Well, I think we need to talk to all of the stakeholders here and find out what proposed changes are coming about. I know there's been talk about eliminating one of those golf courses because they think it's not profitable. I also know there's some disagreement over how the accounting for the golf course is really done. I've been given some information that tells me that the statistics that get released by the city aren't necessarily accurate, and that part of it has to do with perhaps the expenses that are being incurred for the city employees that are working there, and maybe we could do more with more teenagers or youths part-time to bring down the expense of running the golf courses. But I think it is a great, beautiful resource to have in our city, and it certainly lends a wonderful green space. And I think anything that's natural like that that we can preserve, I would be very much reluctant to get rid of, and I would try to employ whatever methods we can to keep it.
Chris Tolbert, if elected, how would you work with Parks and Rec and Ramsey County and others to address proposed changes in Highland Golf Course?
Yeah, I think the question's referring to the Highland 9 course and the visioning study that the Parks Department has been doing over the last couple of years. I think that's an important conversation for us to have. I think we should always look at how we are using our limited park resources. First and foremost, Highland 9 should always be parks. What park service that is, I think, is the question. In this neighborhood, I often hear from parents who say, I'm sick of driving my kids to Blaine. I'm sick of taking my kids out to Woodbury for baseball. I'm sick of having to drive to Vadnais Heights to play soccer. We have a very limited park resources in our area of Highland for active participation for kids. And we need to continue to visit those issues and find spaces for families to be able to stay here and families to be able to play on. And I think Highland 9, it's early on in the conversation. There's no changes proposed, but I think it's a conversation we as a community need to have.
The next question is another question about trash. Can we start with you, Chris Tolbert? Here's the question. Can you address the force majeure clause in regards to the trash contract? Why is that clause relevant in this election?
Well, I think the force majeure clause, in law school, I remember going over the force majeure clause, and I think the force majeure clause has gotten more press than it's ever gotten in the history of anything. But thinking back, law students are probably laughing about it right now, those first-year law students. But the force majeure clause is what we have been talking about and what that will mean based on the referendum results. And that's, quite frankly, what we don't know. Force majeure generally is for acts of God, hurricanes, things like that. Whether or not a referendum counts as force majeure is what we're not exactly sure of. If it does, and you can get out of the contract with zero damages, that's one thing. If you have to complete the contract, or you have to stay in you can get out of the contract but pay damages, those are a lot of different things. And we'll see if the Supreme Court addresses that or not.
Patty Hartman, can you address the force majeure clause and why it's relevant in this election?
It's relevant because it's being used as a ruse by the city to pretend as though they don't know what the result of the referendum has been. Judge Castro cited the force majeure clause as the simple and ready answer for why the city didn't need to worry about ever having to fulfill that contract if the ordinance went away. The contract has a clause right in it, and force majeure just means a major force. Sometimes it's an act of God. All it means is a force that's outside the control of the parties to the contract. And certainly the referendum is beyond the control of the city as well as the haulers. And it was also anticipated as something that could happen because the city has to know every time they pass an ordinance, there's the opportunity, though they don't want to give it, there is the opportunity for the residents or the citizens to take a referendum of that ordinance. And so really, it's a very simple proposition for the city to walk away from that contract and not have to pay any damages.
The next question is about the schools. Patty Hartman, would you start? What is the city's role in supporting the St. Paul Public Schools?
I think the city does have an obligation, and I think that it does do quite a bit of work here to fulfill it. Certainly we pay property taxes, and there are from time to time levies, and I think it's important to have a very good school system. It certainly says a lot about the value of our community to support the school system for our children, our educational system. It's important no matter where. I think one of the things, though, that we do that isn't really so well known is that when we have these developers come in and we give them tax increment financing, we don't realize that a lot of times we're bleeding money away from the schools. And sometimes we're wondering what's going on with why there seems to be a shortage. And I think sometimes we make decisions here on the new developments that have a detrimental impact on the funds that we think the schools deserve.
Chris Tolbert, what's the city's role in your view in supporting the St. Paul Public Schools?
Yeah, when I'm out talking to families, particularly parents with young kids, the thing that they often cite is schools, based on where they're going to live, whether they're going to stay in St. Paul or whatnot. We have been fortunate historically to have a great, both public and private schools across St. Paul. I think it is in our interest as a city to ensure that we continue to have great schools and that people believe that we have great schools. The public schools are important. I'm a proud product of them, and we need to support them in every possible way, whether that's through transit by making it safer for kids to walk to school, whether that's after school programming, whether that's before school programming or rec check or things like that, whether it's the programs that we offer in the libraries here. And it's fascinating. The libraries, I was library chair, and I visited all the different libraries, and every library offered after school programming or tutoring that really was specific to the needs of that neighborhood. And that's a way that we can really do wraparound services for schools and after school programming. And it's something that we need to continue to do because the schools are an important component to keep families here in St. Paul.
I think we have time for 2 more questions, and here's the first of the 2. This is another question about trash. And we'll start with Chris Tolbert. What would you do to address property owners of duplexes and triplexes that don't need a trash can for each residence? And what about neighbors who used to share? So property owners of duplexes and triplexes that don't need a trash can for each residence, and what about neighbors who used to share? Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, and I will say that the triplex, duplex issue with trash is one of the mistakes of the trash contract. It's something that was not done right. It was something that wasn't fully thought out, and it's something that we need to fix. I think it's something that we can improve on. I don't think that's the reason to go away from organized trash collection, but it's something that we need to improve on. I think we need to continue to try and approach the haulers. I suspect they would always be willing to do it for more money, which might not be palatable to single-family homeowners. But that's something that was a mistake, and it should be corrected. And I think it's one of the major lessons that we can learn as we move forward with organized trash collection.
Patty Hartman, what would you do to address this issue, duplexes and triplexes that don't need a trash can for each resident, and neighbors who used to share a trash can?
Well, I'd say you should vote no on the referendum, and then you'll have a chance to fix it now and not wait for a maybe chance in 4 more years, which is what the city's position on it would be. That was one of the most ridiculous, absurd aspects of the city's trash plan. It was warned of. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of citizen comments about that, saying they did not favor the city's trash plan because they didn't like those aspects, and yet the city did it anyway. And having attended the meetings that have been held around town, the listening sessions, the city's position has been, maybe that'll be up for renegotiation at the end of the contract, which is just a little more than 4 years away. So I think we need to fix it now, save the people the trouble of the money, the unnecessary trash containers, free up the parking spaces that have been taken away by having to house or maintain all of these unnecessary trash containers, and certainly reduce the amount of money that's being misspent for non-trash services. But the way to do it is vote no.
So here's the last question before our closing remarks from the candidates. And the question is, what would each of you as candidates like for your legacy to be? And we'll start with you, Patty Hartman. What would you like your legacy to be?
I guess I would feel honored if people could say, we had a renaissance, we had a rebirth in democracy in St. Paul in 2019, 2020. We got some new leadership We got some leadership that was willing to listen to the people and allow them to have a voice again, a true democracy. That's what I hope for my legacy.
Chris Tolbert, what would you like your legacy to be?
Yeah, as someone who grew up in this neighborhood, who lives in this neighborhood, and someone who will likely always live in St. Paul, as cliche as it might sound, I just hope I made this city and this neighborhood a better place for people. I hope that I helped do things that made it life better for future generations. And at the end of the day, that I made St. Paul a better place.
That's all the time we have for audience questions, but now we are going to go to the candidates' closing remarks. And we'll rotate those from the beginning where Chris Tolbert, you were first, so instead we'll ask Patty Hartman to go first with her closing remarks for 2 minutes per candidate.
I'm not sure I'm going to need 2 minutes. That last question probably summed it up. But that is what I really believe. I think that we're missing a true democracy in this town. And I think it's very sad. It's troubling. But I do see the potential to bring it back. And I see so many really bright and involved people that just want a chance. They have so many good ideas and they care so deeply about this city. And I would really like to help bring those people together and give those people a voice. Because I think we have a gem of a city. And I think that we can bring it forth and have a rebirth and become a model. We're not like any other city. We don't want to be Minneapolis. And we sure don't want to be New York or Chicago, really, do we? This is a beautiful city that appreciates its own unique character. And I would really like to help restore that and give it a voice. Thank you.
Chris Tolbert, your closing remarks for 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, thank you for moderating. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this on in partnership with the McAllister-Groveland District Council and Highland District Council. Patty, thank you for being here. And thank you all for coming out tonight on this rainy night. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you could have been doing, and I appreciate that you care so much about our neighborhood. That's one of the best parts of representing Highland Park and McAllister-Groveland is your involvement. I look forward to continuing this conversation that we started here today. I look forward to continuing it on the doors. I look forward to continue it in coffee shops, in your backyard if you invite me, or in your living room if you invite me. It has been an honor to represent you. I hope that I can continue to earn your support. I think St. Paul's future is bright, and I know together we can make it even brighter, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
I have a few thank yous now before we end. I'd like to thank the candidates for participating in this forum and for your willingness to participate in the democratic process by running for office. Thank you to the League of Women Voters St. Paul, in partnership with the Highland Park Community Council, the McAllister-Groveland Community Council, the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, and Fair Vote Minnesota for sponsoring this forum. A thank you, audience, for attending the forum, and I ask you all to remember to vote on or before November 5th. That concludes the forum, and let's give the candidates another round of applause.
Thank you.